I have got it on
Oh, yeah,
Here we go.
Here we go.
So I'm introducing you to Julian Buchanan. He's been working with drug issues for 4 decades, initially with people struggling with addiction in the community and in prisons, before moving to academia as a criminology professor. I had the privilege of studying under Julian in my undergrad. He had a focus on drug policy, and Julian's published over 50 articles on the subject, worked as an expert advisor and editor for the UNODC, and has addressed conferences around the world on the subject. He also enjoys brewing craft beers, a legal drug, spending time with the grandkids, and the other thing is he gave up watching a game of Liverpool.
I did. I don't want to know the score either.
Yeah, I don't know the score, so you're fine. But yeah, a huge fan of Liverpool FC. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Kirsten. Yeah, I want to talk about our proposal for changing things in the future, but I need to pick up on some of the things that have been said, and also need to rejig slightly from Kirsten's contributions. I need to make sure I don't repeat too much. But Fiona was saying how important it is that words matter and words are powerful. And I think that is very much at the heart of what we're grappling with in relation to moving away from where we are now to a position of rationality and sensibility in relation to drugs. And within those words are concepts, and within those words are indoctrination and hardwired thinking, within which people struggle to see outside the box. So I'm going to start by trying to move us outside the box. And I was thinking about when you go to the cinema and you see those movies where they have 3D glasses, and you look at the movie without the glasses and it's all fuzzy and it's out of focus and it doesn't really make sense. And then you put the glasses on and then you can see it. And then sometimes things jump out at you. And in some ways it feels to me that in relation to drugs, we need some sort of glasses like that to change the thinking of people, almost like glasses that they can put on their brains, on their lenses within which they interpret and understand what we see. So I'll start by saying there is no war on drugs. There isn't a war on drugs. There aren't people who use drugs like those people over there. We love drugs in our society. Everybody loves drugs in society. Our lives, they revolve around drugs. All our lives revolve around drugs. In the morning, people are desperate to get hold of some stimulant drug. They might have 1 shot, they might have 2 shots. They'll be looking to top up during the rest of the day. They'll have breaks in work where they'll have more caffeine shots. They might even have a nicotine shot, another psychoactive stimulant. In countries, different cultures, they won't be taking caffeine. They might be chewing a coca leaf. They might be chewing a cat leaf. Those 2 drugs are illegal. If you did that here, you'd be in big trouble. But they're just stimulant drugs, no different to nicotine and caffeine. Towards the end of our days, not our days as in life, but towards the end of the day, people are looking for a depressant drug, a psychoactive depressant drug to chill them out, to help them unwind. They might go for a beer, they might have a glass of wine. So depressant drugs like that help us to relax, help us to chill out, help us maybe to fall asleep or become sleepy. And then we structure all our sort of celebration around drugs. If it's your birthday, if it's you passed your driving test, if it's a new year, if it's a baptism, if it's a wedding, whatever it is, if you've been invited round to a friend's house, you take drugs with you. You do drugs. You can buy cards, greeting cards, celebratory cards for these events. The cards will have on it alcohol, bubbles, celebrations. People might say, oh, you've got a new job. Well done, congratulations. I hope you're going to celebrate tonight. What does that mean? Go and have a good time and celebrate. It means go and get ratted on alcohol. Now, I'm not trying to have a go at legal drugs. What I'm trying to do here is to say that the people who really struggle with the views that are largely held here are people who do drugs. But they look at me and they look at you, or some of you, and they say, but we can't legalize drugs. Well, there's a cognitive dissonance here. There's a mistake. There's something that doesn't quite add up. Our lives are revolving around drugs, and we need to understand that. And we need to shine a light on that hypocrisy, on that double standard. And people use being completely ratted on alcohol. And as Kirsten said, I love alcohol. I make lots of craft beer. But like all drugs, there are times where people use them maybe in ways that are a bit harmful, not just to themselves, but to other people. And so you'll see people who are completely ratted and they'll be staggering. And if you go to A&E, they will tell you that when people are staggering like that, it's very difficult to know the difference between somebody who is off their face with alcohol and somebody who's brain damaged. So they don't know whether that person has been hit by a car or whether that person's completely intoxicated. But that being ratted is a sign of cultural status. I had a bloody good night last night. And then in the morning, oh, you had a good time, did you? And what I'm trying to say here is that isn't it odd how we can glorify and glamorize and accept and accommodate drug use like that? But other drug use, like what Fiona was talking about, people are sent to prison. So society loves drugs and always has done. What did the New Zealand government do when they first became a parliament? What was the first law that they made? Yep. The first law that they did in 1854 was to enable alcohol to be served in parliaments. That was the first law that the government passed.
It builds on Friday on display in the new bar.
Right. So you can go and see, yeah? This is what we're up against. This level of MPs who will be pro-alcohol. They have their own bar in Parliament, and most governments do have their own bar. It's probably subsidised as well. And those same people who are knocking back drugs will sit there and say, we can't legalise drugs. Drugs are bad. Drugs are awful. So it's a bit crazy in that sense, a bit odd. We can have a debate about sugar, and that's not important to this discussion, but I'd argue that sugar is a psychoactive drug. A psychoactive drug is a drug that impacts your body, but also has impact on your mood and general feeling and well-being. I would argue that sugar in that sense is a psychoactive drug, but it's also one of the addictive psychoactive drugs. Addiction, again, I can't talk too much about that because it'd be another lecture or whatever, but addiction being much more than physical addiction, than psychological, social addiction. But the point of this slide is to say, look, we all use drugs and we need to get to this position. If we are going to change this law, we need to get people to understand we are all drug users. And you'll see a whole range of different drugs on that slide there. So the so-called war has duped us. It's a draconian regime prohibition, and it's based on propaganda. Propaganda, prejudice, misinformation, stereotypes, they are all hallmarks of oppression. They operate in racism, they operate in colonialism, they operate in homophobia, they operate in sexism. They are the same processes, except in relation to drugs, we are at a stage where the oppression is still embedded within the laws and the policies. We don't see the same level of laws and policies still operating. We still have problems with those issues I mentioned, but those issues are much more cultural and social as opposed to structural in terms of within the laws. There is institutional discrimination embedded within cultures of organisations, but not within the policies and the laws of those organisations. But we do have it in respect of drugs. So you go to your doctor's waiting room and you see a sign which says drug seekers will not be tolerated. So if you say you've got a bad back or whatever, and they say, oh, you've got a drug conviction, then you're not going to get the treatment that you deserve. So after a lifetime, and it has been that long, of misinformation, propaganda, prejudice, we've been indoctrinated. So the drugs that are illegal, they're illegal because they're dangerous. You want the evidence that they're dangerous? Well, the evidence that they're dangerous is that they're illegal. And so you go around a circular argument because there is no evidence. And what this has done is it's created a drug divide. And actually, I've never used an illicit drug in my life, so I can't say we as prohibitive drug users are prohibited drugs. But people who regularly use prohibited drugs, and that's cool, and that's fine. I think we shouldn't be bothered about people using drugs. We should be concerned about problematic drug use or people having difficulties. That's the concern that we need to have. I hope you're not concerned that I'm using alcohol, but I hope you would be concerned if it's messing up my life or messing up people around me.
How comfortable are people with that we have a substance that we use and want to use to find people and to use it here? Do we have the local rates and
I'm sorry, I need to carry on. Sorry, we will take questions afterwards. Sorry, I can't easily juggle with trying to listen but we will be staying around at 4:30, and there will be food and drinks, and we can carry on the conversation. Yes. So what I'm saying is we've got this drug divide, and that divide is embraced by both sides of that divide. So I think sometimes as people who use prohibited drugs, we don't recognise and push that the others are using drugs. And the others who use drugs just definitely don't acknowledge that they're using drugs. But the truth of the matter is, and it's been mentioned a couple of times today, Professor David Nutt did 2 studies in the UK, and Rose Crossin and Fiona Hutton and others did this study in New Zealand, and they are both seminal work which identifies and compares the harms of drugs to one another. And 2 of the drugs there in the top 4 are legal drugs. This is the madness that we're up against, is that we've got legal drugs that are more harmful, and we've got loads of drugs down on the far end that are criminalised, prohibited, and people are punished, but they are far less harmful. Now, I'm not arguing that, as you would expect, that the drugs at the far end should all be prohibited, because it would make things worse. And what we've got in one sense is like a war on drugs. It's a war between drugs, maybe, where you've got the approved drugs at the top enjoying their privilege, enjoying their status, being promoted. It's hard for me to watch a TV series or a TV movie without somebody at some point opening a bottle of wine on that event. And so the answer to the problem we've got on this slide here isn't to persuade and to try and drag one of the people below to the castle at the top. That's not the answer.
The LSD guy looks like he's enjoying himself.
Yeah, maybe they are enjoying themselves, despite it. Maybe he's on LSD because he finds the whole environment a bit too weird. Yeah. But really what's happening up here is there is a war between drugs, and there is a war on drugs. And whenever I write about drugs now, I always try to put drugs in inverted commas, because we are all drug users. But when the media and people talk about drugs, they are talking about prohibited drugs, because what they are taking, they don't see as drugs, and they will not see themselves as drug users. But they are, and what they're taking is just as risky as some of the stuff, or a lot more risky. But this sort of attack on prohibited drugs is in some ways almost like an attempt at annihilation. And the UNODC branch, UNGAS, a special sessions that was held in 1998, they actually wanted to They had the slogan, "A drug-free world, we can do it." It's hideous. It's and dangerous and disturbing, to be honest with you. The idea that you'd want to eradicate drugs from the world. But of course, they wouldn't be talking about caffeine, tobacco, or nicotine. Caffeine. So what we've got really is drug wars between drugs, which privileges and promotes societal use of a particular group of drugs while policing and severely punishing societal use of other drugs. And it offends me hugely. I mean, to be honest, when I heard Adam speak earlier on, I'm almost moved for tears at the injustice of it all. It's so wrong that people are being treated this way because they choose different drugs. And then particularly people like Adam who are taking drugs to cope with massive trauma. I mean, it's fine to take these drugs if they're your drugs of choice and you enjoy them. That's why I take alcohol. So your motivation is fine, but it just hurts me even more when people are self-medicating and they're being punished. And this has been referred to, well, the graph hasn't been referred to, but it's been said already that the war on drugs is not only costly, the demand for drugs and the supply of drugs is not going down. This is the UNODC's own data. So it points out that, and this is percentage, it's not numerical. So the percentage of people in the world using illicit drugs is not going down. If anything, over that period, it's going up. And the other thing to point out in this is the UNODC's own data is acknowledging that most people who use drugs are not problematic drug users. You'll see at the bottom there, that very light shaded blue are the people that they call having drug use disorders. Most people who use drugs do not have an issue. So we have a drug law which has utterly failed its objectives, has fueled violence and gun crime, has created a lucrative illegal market, has funded gangs and cartels, and increased overdose and addiction. Would you let a law like that carry on? It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's damaging our society so much, as you've heard already. And this graph has been very well received internationally and sort of hits the nail to a lot of people, and they've adopted it from the HRCA. And it's really illustrating that when you look at harm, most harm, and obviously this is a graphical representation, but most harm is prohibition harm. But it sits under the surface and it goes unacknowledged. And as has been said, most of that harm in terms of incarceration, arrest, is targeted at the most vulnerable of our society. I watched the Elephant episode on Should We Legalise Drugs? I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a fantastic clip where Tricia Walsh, who was somebody who was struggling with methamphetamine and very traumatized life journeys, was self-medicating for years, committed a whole pile of crimes, ended up incarcerated for years, and she's sorted now, whatever. But she was saying that the situation for Maori in relation to being nabbed all the time for drug convictions and incarcerated, she referred to it as the merry-go-round. And I thought it was painfully sad and accurate, given the number of Maori people who, and this you saw from Fiona's research, people who are known will be arrested and picked regularly, and Adam alluded to that as well. Once you're known, but people are in these communities, often the police, and it just keeps going and going. And it's interesting with Trish as well. In that interview, they said to her, "And Trish, what would you do? Would you legalise or decriminalise?" And she said very clearly, "I would legalise all drugs." I mean, from my own research, my own experience interviewing lots and lots of people in qualitative research, which is, as Fiona says, is really sad and difficult to carry at times, but it's easy for me. I'm privileged, and they're the ones living that life, not me, and it's so hard. But for those people, almost everybody, and Adam said it as well, he said, like, if you look at the prisons, he said, they're all the same people. They've all got the same journeys. And all my work in probation, all my work in the drugs clinic with psychiatrists and prescribing injectable heroin and injectable methadone to people, and oral heroin and methadone, the people's journeys, that they were messed up and struggling before they even started having a problem with drugs. Drugs were a way of filling a void. Drugs were a way of easing the pain. Drugs were a way of creating a busyness and a purpose. Drugs were a way of getting skills. Drugs were a way of being on the go, of having some adrenaline rush. There were a whole pile of things for which were not available to these people in society. They could not find niches, avenues, pathways. But drugs were not their problem. Drugs were the solution to that group of people. And that was certainly, I think, what Adam was alluding to in his personal journey, but also what Trish was alluding to, Tricia Walsh on the elephants. So prohibition would have us believe somehow that the reason why people end up being violent or people end up being criminals or stealing is because of the drugs. But when people are prescribed, and I've had lots and lots of people prescribed legal drugs, when they're prescribed and they're on clean supplies, they don't do those things. When people are prescribed Ritalin or Adderall or methamphetamine, where they prescribe it as methamphetamine in the States, they don't develop meth face, or they don't look like this, and then 5 years on Adderall or whatever, their face looks like this. No, it's all to do with lifestyle. It's all to do with the subculture that is embedded when you prohibit drugs. When you prohibit drugs, you're just driving people completely underground, and the whole culture of unregulated drugs leads to contamination. It leads to people being caught up, fingered on the hoof all the time. It's a whole underground culture which is quite toxic. So we're faced with a stark choice. Who should manage the supply of drugs? The criminal underworld, or should we legally regulate drugs? Now, I don't know about you, but...
Are they the same group?
Sorry?
Are they the same group?
No. If we legally regulated drugs, then you would be able to get the drugs from the pharmacy on prescription, or you could go and get some drugs would be available over pharmacy, or maybe for some drugs, like you can with a very dangerous drug called alcohol, you can go across the road there and there'll be a room there and you can purchase it. And if they think you're in any risk, they'll stop serving it to you, and they'll look after you and whatever. So drugs are available. So
I was just trying to say that obviously the first group is the safest, but it's not what the second group is doing.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
Sorry, obviously the first group is the safest to run in a supply of drugs, because the second group is doing what they think they're doing at the moment, selfishly, not working, bad, highly paid people doing bad things to lots of people, poor on them, some marginalised people. Obviously the criminal underground will do a better job.
Yeah, we'll have a chat later. I'm not too sure I follow really legally. I use a legally regulated drug. I use alcohol, and I'm not any different to any other people because I use a legally regulated drug. I don't really understand how a legally regulated drug makes you any different to other people. But so for me, this is a no-brainer. It's an obvious choice, and essentially, this is the sort of model we're looking at. Unregulated drugs, you've got no support, you've got no safety, you've got no quality control, you've got no idea what you're taking. Regulated drugs, here you're purchasing them from some sort of social bar or whatever. You could be. I'm saying, can you just be quiet, because I'm trying to get on.
What you're saying is so untrue.
Well, okay, you can talk about it later.
I think the fact that community pharmacies, we have done this kind of
I'm sorry, we'll talk about it later. I'm not going to waste and
safe people are the people not in the system. Yeah, but that's offensive and wrong. And it's
sure.
It's about Indigenous people. It's about marginalised people. You say they don't know what they're doing with drugs, and I don't know how you.
No, look, I'm talking about when you purchase an unregulated drug, you don't know what's in that drug, and that is not to do with your Indigenous status or your race or your class or your gender. If you purchase something, you don't know what's in that drug, and this is why people overdose, because they don't know the purity, and this is why we have drug checking, because people are not sure about the strength or the purity or what it's mixed with, and within that there's limited safety. And there's no legal regulations of quality control over illegal drugs. Regulated drugs could be sold through pubs or social clubs, but they could also be through prescription, and they could also be through on sale at the pharmacist. And it's for that reason why we certainly we would much prefer legalization than decriminalization, because decriminalization leaves the supply and the criminals and internationally cartels and gangs. It delivers an unregulated, unknown, unsafe supply, whereas the legal regulation will have people who can respond and have somewhere to take action if they're not happy about something. There will be consumer rights. There will be legal issues that can be taken to the police. If you get somebody who you hand over 6 grams of heroin or whatever, and they do a runner on you, you can't tell the police about it. But you can take action if this happens with a legal substance. So there's a whole legal framework which we should be pretty familiar with for organised sales of legal stuff. Now, some people have said, well, we could legalise this drug or low-risk drugs. And I struggle to understand why you would say that. Because the more risky a drug, the more reason to regulate it. If a drug is high risk and got lots of propensity to overdose or whatever, then that drug really needs to be purchased legally so you know exactly what it is. Now, I'm not arguing for low-risk drugs not to be regulated. I'm saying that the Misuse of Drugs Act is not based upon risk. As you've seen with the Crossin et al. Research, the Misuse of Drugs Act is not based on risk. So to approach the Misuse of Drugs Act and say, please legalise my drug, it's low risk, is almost like giving some credibility or understanding that this act was about risk. It was never about risk. It's got no science or status or rationale to support the Misuse of Drugs Act. So where do we go from here? What's the way forward? The way forward is to try to hit this sweet spot near the bottom of this curve. The further you go, I was going to say my left, is it your left? It is your left too, isn't it? Yeah, wasn't too sure how these things work. So the further you go to the left, the greater the harms, because prohibition is more harmful than drugs ever could be. And we've evidenced that very clearly today. And you'll see this graph was adapted from John Marks, who's a psychiatrist who I used to work with in the UK, and where in many ways I learned my trade in the mid-1980s when we were prescribing injectable heroin and injectable methadone and operating maintenance and low threshold. But John had a U-curve, which is a standard framework of saying You go up this way and the harm increases, and you go that way, the harm increases. So it's a standard U-curve, and that makes good sense. But I think the problem with projecting that in relation to drugs and prohibition is that it might make you think that the legalization without good controls, drugs are going to create massive harm. So I've reconfigured the graph to show that even with awful regulation of the industry, you would not manage to compete with the harm of prohibition on the left-hand side.
Julian, if the legal drug market is created by kickbacks, what about applying a bit of reverse psychology and using kickbacks in the illegal drugs?
Yeah.
We're working on it. It's been done at the moment, quietly.
Starting with the politicians.
So,
We got into it.
legalization doesn't introduce drugs. They're here already. So that's one of the arguments that people make against drugs. But legalization will not be introducing drugs. They're already here. What legalization does is it decides and gives a chance of where you buy them from. At the moment, the only place you can buy illegal drugs is in the unregulated market. So it's important that we move towards legalization, but not worry about introducing drugs because they are already here. And no drug is made safer by prohibition. Every drug is made more dangerous by prohibition. So just to pad out this graph a little bit more, we need to have a system whereby we regulate drugs in a way that doesn't push people into the illegal market. If our regulation system is so punitive or so anxious about protecting or appeasing prohibitionists, then we will have a model of regulation which will fail, which will drive a whole pile of people into the underground market. The purpose of legal regulation is to eliminate the underground market. You will never eliminate it. We'll always be seeking to try to diminish it as much as possible. So as Fiona said, the medicinal cannabis arrangement has led to people who have got needs going into the illegal market because they cannot afford the prescriptions, and they've been prohibited from growing their own unless they can find some defense if they were convicted. But it's a stress and a worry. So we've got to have a legal regulation model which doesn't mean that certain people are going to end up back in the illegal market. And too often our reforms are through a lens of prohibition. We need reforms to be through a lens of health and social care. We can't play with a system, the Misuse of Drugs Act, which is through a lens of prohibition, which has a particular way of seeing drugs all the time. If you go through the courts, you go through Parliament and you create a framework for legal regulation through a lens of prohibition, you can be damn sure that Maori people will be picked up for something or other. You'd be damn sure that poor and working class people will be picked up for something or other. And when we talk about regulation, alcohol, I would suggest, is on that right-hand side of the scale. Alcohol needs to be shifted back down to the middle. Alcohol not only enjoys this monopoly and privileged position, the sponsorships, the outlets, the number of outlets in poor areas, it's ridiculous. So when we talk about legal regulation, it can mean anything to different people. So legal regulation is often used to talk about legally regulating use. I'm not interested that much on legally regulating use. I'm interested in strictly legally regulating the commercial market. That's where the regulation needs to be aimed at. The legal regulation needs to be aimed at labelling, advertising, sponsorships, donations, licenses, production. Really, it's your body, it should be your choice. Nobody should be arrested or challenged over the choices of what they want to do with their body. If it affects other people, we've got a conversation to have. But generally, if it's your body and you want to do whatever, that is your choice. And I don't understand how we can have legal drugs being promoted and accepted and people doing them, but then them incarcerating or wanting to punish people who choose different drugs. As I say, I've not used an illegal drug in my life, but I'm fighting for the rights of people to be able to do what I do with alcohol. So HRC is going to introduce a petition later this week. And the petition is arguing for a new drug law. We're arguing that the old drug laws should be abolished and rescinded. The drug laws should start again. And this is a drug law not for illegal drugs. This is a drug law for all psychoactive drugs. So we need to bring alcohol, caffeine, tobacco, so that we can see this management of drugs. We're all on the same page. Prohibited drug use and currently legal drug use would come under the one single act. It needs to be managed by the Ministry of Health. We need to protect the civil rights, and in protecting the civil rights, largely we're protecting the rights of vulnerable people. So we'd legalise all adult possession, cultivation, production of all drugs for personal use. Now, if that is fully legal, then people have got no reason to be stopped and searched and arrested and handcuffed, like the woman that Fiona was talking about in the handcuffs when she was in Wellington, and like it's not on. We need to strictly regulate the commercial supply, and that's where most of the regulations come in. Of course, there would be regulations of age for individual use and regulations about maybe licenses for production of certain drugs. We need to honour Te Tiriti and ensure that that's built into the process itself, and also make sure that Maori have services run and led by Maori, and we need to also understand and address the issues of Maori and in terms of plants and their indigenous rights in relation to that. We need to base our laws on science, evidence and lived experiences, upholding the principles of harm reduction and human rights, not on hunch or anecdote. I know somebody which is the way often our drug laws are framed. And we need to ensure that our regulations are fit for purpose and don't cause people to turn to an illegal market. That is crucial. I think most of our drug laws and our reforms that take place are so fearful and so conducted through a lens of prohibition that they actually mean that people will end up going to the illegal market. So in some countries, you find that cannabis is legal to grow, but it can't be seen by anybody in the public. Or you can't walk down the road with a cannabis plant, or you can only have X amount. It's obviously you can have some limits on amounts, but the amounts are often very silly and not realistic. And then finally, the petition will be entitled Better Drug Laws. And the title of our petition, I've given you the detail of the petition, but the petition is simply that the House of Representatives rescind existing drug laws and create a new single drug law for all drugs. And I think being under health and being all drugs helps to create a paradigm shift. And I think we need to see all this within the lens of health and social care. And we need to create a bottom-up movement where we take this issue to the public, and we try to create an energy towards a more rational approach to drugs, and one that is fit for purpose, and one that's fitting for this 2025 and not 1950. Thank you.